Every empire rises with a dream, but it often falls with a whisper, not from the sword of the enemy, but from betrayal within. Today, we peel back the polished marble and golden thrones to reveal the treachery, ambition, and backroom deals that brought emperors to their knees. Welcome to When Emperors Fall, the Hidden Betrayals. Chapter 1. Julius Caesar. It too brute? Julius Caesar's rise was anything but ordinary. A master of rhetoric, strategy, and ambition, he was a man who understood the mechanics of both war and politics. Born into a patrician family with modest influence, he climbed the ranks through a mix of charm, alliances, and battlefield brilliance. His conquest of Gaul was not just a military triumph, it was a masterclass in public relations. He documented his campaigns in the Commentari di Bello Gallico, portraying himself as the heroic leader defending Rome. These writings spread his fame across the Republic, endearing him to the public while alarming the Senate. But Caesar wasn't content with fame alone. When ordered to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, he made a fateful decision. In 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon River with his legion, a direct act of insurrection against the Republic. The phrase, "crossing the Rubicon," became immortal, symbolizing a point of no return. Over the next few years, Caesar defeated his rivals, including Pompey the Great, and consolidated power. He enacted reforms, including debt relief and the Julian calendar. Yet, his declaration as Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, struck a nerve with Rome's elite, who saw in him not a reformer, but a tyrant. Warnings swirled. Soothsayers, omens, and his own wife, Calpurnia, begged him to stay home on March 15th, 44 BCE, the Ides of March. But Caesar, confident in his power and dismissive of threats, walked into the Senate unguarded. There, he was surrounded by over 60 senators. The first dagger struck his neck. Chaos erupted. Among the attackers was Brutus, his former ally and surrogate son. When Caesar saw him, he reportedly uttered, "Et tu, Brute," a line that would echo through history. In that moment, he wasn't just betrayed by Brutus, but by the Republic itself, a state that could no longer reconcile its ideals with the man who tried to save and remake it. Quick fact: rather than restoring the Republic, Caesar's murder plunged Rome into a series of civil wars. Ultimately, it led to the rise of Augustus and the creation of the Roman Empire. Chapter 2. Commodus, the emperor assassinated by his inner circle. Commodus was born into greatness, but ruled with delusion. As the son of Marcus Aurelius, one of Rome's most revered emperors and Stoic philosophers, expectations were sky high. But the apple, in this case, fell far from the tree. Commodus came to power at age 18, sharing a brief co-reign with his father before ruling alone. Unlike Marcus, who saw the emperorship as a solemn duty, Commodus viewed it as a divine right and a personal playground. He fancied himself a reincarnation of Hercules. He paraded through Rome in lion skins, carrying a wooden club. He renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana, built statues of himself across the empire, and appeared as a gladiator in the Colosseum. These fights were staged, of course, with his opponents often being wounded or tethered animals. While the populace was entertained, the elite was scandalized. Commodus neglected statecraft entirely, He delegated authority to a succession of favorites, many of whom abused their power for personal gain. Corruption soared. The Senate was humiliated. Executions became routine. Eventually, even his inner circle had enough. His mistress, Marcia, discovered her name on an imperial execution list. Acting swiftly, she slipped poison into Commodus's wine. But the emperor vomited it up. In desperation, Marcia summoned Narcissus, a professional wrestler and Commodus's personal trainer. That night, in his private bath chamber, Commodus was strangled, not by an assassin, but by the very man who had once helped him train for gladiatorial performances. The emperor, who believed he was a god, died gasping, alone. Quick fact: his death ended the Nerva-Antonine dynasty and plunged Rome into chaos. Within a single year, 5 men would claim the imperial throne, sparking a period of instability known as the Year of the Five Emperor. Chapter 3: Caligula, Madness and the Blade. Gaius Julius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus, better known as Caligula, began his reign as a symbol of hope. The son of Germanicus, beloved by the army and people, he was greeted with celebrations and prayers when he became emperor in 37 CE. His early acts included tax relief, pardons, and public games. But just months into his reign, Caligula fell seriously ill. He recovered, but Rome would never be the same. What followed was a descent into cruelty, excess, and madness. Historians disagree on whether he suffered from a neurological condition, psychological breakdown, or both, but the results were terrifying. He declared himself a living god, erected statues of himself in temples, and demanded that citizens worship him. He mocked senators by forcing them to run beside his chariot. He spent lavishly, bankrupting the treasury. He even suggested that the moon goddess visit him in his bedchambers. Perhaps most notoriously, he proposed making his horse, Incitatus, a consul. Some claim it was a joke to mock the Senate. Others believe he was serious. Either way, the message was clear. Rome's political elite were beneath contempt. His reign of terror extended to executions and public humiliations. He exiled or killed rivals, perceived threats, and even family members. By 41 CE, the Praetorian Guard had enough. Led by Cassius Chaerea, a military tribune humiliated by the emperor, the conspirators plotted his end. After a theatrical performance at the Palatine Games, Caligula walked through a private tunnel. There, Chaerea struck first, followed by others. Caligula was stabbed over 30 times. His wife and daughter were also killed, extinguishing his bloodline. The emperor, who believed himself immortal, was silenced in the shadows of his own palace, not by foreign invaders, but by the very bodyguards sworn to protect him. Quick fact: the assassination created a power vacuum quickly filled by Caligula's uncle, Claudius. The role of the Praetorian Guard in choosing emperors would shape Roman politics for decades to come. Chapter 4: Elagabalus, the boy priest emperor. When Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Augustus, better known as Elagabalus, ascended to the imperial throne in 218 CE, he was barely 14 years old. But his story begins not in Rome, but in the sun-soaked city of Emesa in modern-day Syria, where he served as the high priest of the deity Elagabal, a Syrian sun god. His rise to power was the result of a political coup orchestrated by his grandmother. Julia Maesa, sister-in-law to the late Emperor Septimius Severus. She spread the rumor that Elagabalus was the illegitimate son of Caracalla, a popular but recently assassinated emperor. With the backing of the Syrian legions, the teenager defeated the reigning Emperor Macrinus and marched triumphantly into Rome. But the Rome he entered was not ready for what followed. Elagabalus brought his god to the capital, literally. He erected a grand temple on the Palatine Hill and declared Elagabal as the chief deity of Rome, above Jupiter himself. Religious customs were overturned. Sacred Roman rites were blended or replaced entirely with Eastern practices. Even the sacred fire of Vesta was moved to his new temple. This religious upheaval scandalized traditional Roman sensibilities. The Senate was outraged. The people were confused, but that was only the beginning. Elagabalus wore makeup, preferred feminine clothing, and was openly involved in same-sex relationships. He reportedly married 5 women and at least 1 man. Some ancient sources even claim he offered vast sums of money to physicians willing to perform gender reassignment surgery, though such accounts may be colored by bias and sensationalism. To some, his rule represented liberation and multiculturalism. To most Romans, it was sacrilege, decadence, and chaos. His obsession with the exotic, his disregard for tradition, and his public sexual behavior made him the subject of ridicule and hatred. Though Rome had seen eccentric emperors before, Elagabalus was different. He was foreign, flamboyant, and unafraid. His behavior alienated the military, the Senate, and even his own family. His cousin, Severus Alexander, groomed in the shadows by Julia Maesa, was increasingly seen as a more stable alternative. The final betrayal came from within. In 222 CE, the Praetorian Guard, no longer loyal, entered the imperial palace. Elagabalus and his mother, Julia Soaemias, were seized and executed. Their bodies were dragged through the streets of Rome and dumped in the Tiber River. A brutal message from an empire no longer tolerant of what they saw as desecration. The boy priest who tried to remake Rome in the image of a Mesa was ultimately undone not just by his foreignness or youth, but by a society unwilling to bend its identity. Quick fact: Elagabalus's reign lasted only 4 years, but left a lasting impression on Roman imperial politics. After his death, the Senate issued a damnatio memoriae, an erasure of his name and image from public record. Chapter 5. Roman Emperor Valentinian II, the Puppet Prince. Valentinian II came to power not through conquest, election, or cunning, but through bloodline and convenience. When his father, Valentinian I, died suddenly in 375 CE, his brother Valens was already ruling the Eastern Empire. But the Western legions, wanting to keep power in the family, declared the 4-year-old Valentinian II emperor. His youth was not an anomaly in Roman history, but his dependence on others was. From the moment he donned the purple, Valentinian II was a pawn in a much larger game. For years, real control rested in the hands of his mother, Justina, a politically savvy and fiercely Arian Christian, and later in the hands of powerful generals such as Meribordes and the feared Frankish general Arbogast. Meanwhile, the bishop, Ambrose of Milan, perhaps the most powerful church figure of the day, loomed large as a political force. A staunch Nicene Christian, Ambrose clashed repeatedly with Justina over matters of doctrine and influence. It was not merely a theological debate, it was a contest for the soul and direction of the Western Roman Empire. Valentinian II, now a teenager, found himself at the center of these battles, surrounded by older, more experienced men and women who each claimed to act in his best interest while undermining his authority. In 388 CE, the power struggle intensified. The usurper Magnus Maximus, claiming to defend Orthodox Christianity, invaded Italy. Justina fled with Valentinian II, seeking help from Theodosius III, the Eastern Emperor. Theodosius defeated Maximus, restored Valentinian, and married Valentinian's sister, Galla, tying their dynasties. Yet, even restored, Valentinian remained a figurehead. After Justina's death, Arbogast seized de facto control. Though nominally his protector, Arbogast treated Valentinian more like a subordinate than a sovereign. Tensions escalated when Valentinian attempted to dismiss Arbogast, only to be openly defied. Soon after, in 392 CE, the 21-year-old emperor was found dead, hanging in his palace quarters in Vienne. Officially, it was ruled a suicide, but many, including contemporary sources, suspected foul play. Arbogast claimed innocence, but his motives were clear. Without Valentinian, he could install a more compliant ruler. Within months, Arbogast elevated the rhetorician Eugenius as emperor. Valentinian II's death marked the tragic end of a life spent being manipulated, used, and ultimately discarded. Unlike emperors who fell from power through madness, arrogance, or military defeat, Valentinian's undoing came from a quieter force: irrelevance. Quick fact: Theodosius saw Eugenius's rise as a threat. In 394 CE, he launched a final civil war, defeating Arbogast's forces at the Battle of the Frigidus. Valentinian II was posthumously honored, but the Western Empire would never again wield full independence. It was now deeply intertwined with the East. Chapter 6. Emperor Alexios V. The Fall of Constantinople, 1204. The fall of Constantinople in 1204 is often associated with the Ottoman conquest of 1453, but long before that day came a betrayal that stunned the Christian world. This time, the knives came not from enemies of the faith, but from fellow Christians. And at the center of this betrayal was Alexios Ducas. The Byzantine Empire, once the eastern half of the Roman Empire, was already in a weakened state by the late 12th century. Internal divisions, dynastic disputes, and economic decay had hollowed it out. The aging emperor Isaac II had been deposed by his own brother Alexios III, leaving the throne in disarray. Then came the Fourth Crusade. The Crusaders, originally en route to liberate Jerusalem, were rerouted to Constantinople under suspicious circumstances. The exiled prince, Alexios IV, son of the deposed Isaac II, promised them gold, soldiers, and submission to the Pope if they helped him reclaim his throne. The Crusaders accepted. In 1203, they installed Alexios IV and reinstated his blind father, Isaac II. But the gold he promised didn't exist, and his efforts to raise it through heavy taxation sparked riots in the streets. Amid this chaos rose Alexios Theodoukas, nicknamed Mortsouphlos for his heavy brows. A court official of modest standing, he presented himself as a savior to a city in flames. In a swift coup, he imprisoned and executed Alexios IV, claiming the throne for himself. Alexios IV tried to fortify the city and repel the Crusaders, but the damage was done. The Crusaders, enraged by broken promises and unpaid debts, decided to act, not as liberators, but as conquerors. On April 12, 1204, the unthinkable happened. The Crusaders breached the mighty Theodosian walls and sacked Constantinople. For 3 days, the jewel of Christendom was looted, burned, and desecrated. Holy relics were stolen. Churches were defiled. Citizens were slaughtered. Alexios V fled the city, but his betrayal was not forgotten. He was soon captured by Theodore Lascaris, a rival Byzantine leader. In an act of justice or vengeance, he was thrown from the top of the Theodosian walls. His fall was both literal and symbolic. A man who had seized power through blood and ambition, undone by the very chaos he had hoped to control. Quick fact: the sack of Constantinople marked a turning point in medieval history. It shattered Byzantine power, splintered the Christian world, and deepened the schism between the Latin West and Orthodox East. The empire would survive in fragments, but it would never fully recover. Chapter 7. Napoleon. Betrayed by allies. Defeated by politics. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, was not born into power, but seized it through charisma, genius, and the chaos of revolution. Rising from a modest Corsican family, he built one of the greatest empires in European history. But even the might of Napoleon could not withstand betrayal, not only from enemies, but from within. After years of revolutionary war, Napoleon crowned himself emperor in 1804, a symbolic gesture that told the world he'd bowed to no one, not even the Pope. His campaigns reshaped the map of Europe. The Holy Roman Empire dissolved. Prussia, Austria, and Russia suffered humiliating defeats. Yet behind every triumph lurked instability. Napoleon relied on an intricate network of alliances, puppet states, and trusted marshals. Many of these alliances were built not on loyalty, but fear or opportunism. In Spain, he installed his brother Joseph as king, igniting a brutal guerrilla war. In Germany and Italy, nationalistic resentment simmered. Meanwhile, the Continental System, a trade blockade against Britain, alienated both allies and his own merchants. The turning point came in 1812 with the Russian campaign. Napoleon marched over 600,000 men into Russia, the largest army Europe had ever seen. But Russia refused to meet him in open battle, retreating deeper into its vast terrain, scorching fields as they went. When he reached Moscow, the city was abandoned and burning. The retreat was catastrophic. Starvation, disease, and constant raids decimated his army. Fewer than 100,000 returned. Napoleon's aura of invincibility shattered. In the wake of this disaster, former allies sensed weakness. Prussia, Austria, and even Sweden turned against him. At home, his once loyal marshals began to falter. The tide had turned. In 1814, Paris was invaded. Napoleon's own Senate, which he had filled with loyalists, voted to depose him. He was forced to abdicate and was exiled to Elba, a small island off the Italian coast. Even here, betrayal followed. He learned that Louis XVI was dismantling his reforms and punishing his supporters. 10 months later, he escaped and returned to France in a daring gambit. The army sent to arrest him, instead, joined him. Thus began the 100 Days. But betrayal would strike again. At the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, Marshal Grouchy failed to intercept Prussian reinforcements. Worse, some allies hesitated at crucial moments. Napoleon, outmaneuvered and outnumbered, was defeated by a coalition led by the Duke of Wellington and Prussian General Blucher. This time, there would be no escape. Exiled to the remote island of St. Helena, Napoleon spent his final years dictating memoirs, reflecting on his legacy and his downfall. Quick fact: Napoleon's fall reshaped Europe. The Congress of Vienna restored monarchies, redrew borders, and sought to suppress revolutionary ideals. But his legal reforms, military tactics, and nationalist stirrings would outlive him and inspire generations to come. Chapter 8: Emperor Nicholas II, the betrayal that ended an era. Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, ascended the throne in 1894. He inherited not only an empire stretching across 2 continents, but also a monarchy struggling under the weight of modernization, inequality, and unrest. Though a devoted husband and father, Nicholas lacked the political instincts necessary to navigate the minefield of early 20th century Russia. His reign was marked by a series of escalating crises: the disastrous Russo-Japanese War, the 1905 Revolution, Bloody Sunday, and widespread poverty among the working class. Despite these warning signs, Nicholas clung to the belief in his divine right to rule. He dismissed reforms, mistrusted progressive advisors, and increasingly relied on autocratic decrees. His most fateful decision came in 1915 during World War I, when he took personal command of the Russian army. While he retreated to the front, the government in Petrograd was left in the hands of his wife, Alexandra, who fell under the spell of the mystic Rasputin. His influence and the rumors surrounding it fueled contempt and suspicion among nobles and peasants alike. As casualties mounted on the battlefield and famine spread through the cities, discontent turned to rage. In early 1917, strikes and protests erupted in Petrograd. Troops sent to suppress the crowds joined them instead. The once loyal military betrayed the Tsar, refusing to defend his rule. Nicholas returned to a country he no longer controlled. In a railway car at Pskov, under pressure from generals and politicians, he abdicated the throne in March 1917. His brother refused to take the crown. For the first time in 300 years, Russia had no Tsar. He and his family were placed under house arrest, first in the Alexander Palace, then in Tobolsk, and finally in Ekaterinburg. There, in the dead of night, on July 17, 1918, Nicholas, Alexandra, and their 5 children were led into a basement and executed by Bolsheviks. The betrayal was complete, not only by his military and political elite, but by the very institutions that once upheld his divine rule. The autocracy that had ruled Russia for centuries ended with the sound of gunfire in a dark cellar. The Romanov family's execution shocked the world. Decades later, Nicholas II and his family were canonized as martyrs by the Russian Orthodox Church. Yet the revolution they could not stop gave rise to the Soviet Union and a new, even more ruthless kind of empire, from marble halls to cold exile, from divine titles to forgotten graves. These emperors fell not just to foreign enemies, but to betrayal at home. In every age, in every empire, power is a fragile thing. It can be taken in a whisper with a poisoned cup, or a silent nod from someone who once swore loyalty. Because when emperors fall, it is rarely with glory. More often, it is with betrayal. If you enjoyed this journey through the shadows of history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Tell us in the comments which betrayal changed the course of history the most. Until next time, stay curious